let's normalize this word called grief. Okay, we're all experiencing it. We're all feeling it. Stop cheering it out. Start acknowledging somebody's pain, because that's where the connection is. That's where the beauty is. That's why we're here. We're here to see and support one another along this journey.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Love in Action podcast. We remain the only business show that explores the intersection of leadership and practical love. Love that will empower people to flourish and companies to thrive. Glad you could join us. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast or on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. And if you like the show, we would love it if you could leave us a quick positive review to keep the show ranked high and help more people to find it. All right, we got a great show for you today. We're going to have a guest later on to talk about grief. But first and foremost, say hi to my good friend and co-host, global speaker and three-time author, Rob Holman.
Marcel, always a joy to be with you. And how are you liking my mustache? I'm growing some facial hair. I don't grow great ones, so I have to lean into the screen for those watching, but I know there's many listeners. But I figured I would just show off my new mustache.
I like it. I just thought that you maybe forgot to wash the dirt off your face from, I don't know, maybe you've been rolling around in the mud or something.
Thanks for your encouragement, as always.
Well, it takes me like, about 5 months to actually get to the point where people will say, hey, you have a mustache.
That's great. Yeah, my oldest is 14 years old, and I think he, along with many of his friends, grow a better facial hair than Dad does at age 47. So I'm just saying. Yeah.
All right. So you may recall in the previous co-hosted episode that Rob and I discussed, we talked about the rarely talked about business topic of grief. My business topic of grief? What? Yeah, well, grief is part of the world of work. We bring our grief process into work, or some of us do, some of us neglect it, and then we get into trouble. So Rob and I feel that too many people in the workplace are not prioritizing the grief process to bounce back from tragedy, from loss, from trauma, in order to be running on all cylinders again and be your best self at work. So we decided to expand on this topic, and we're going to be talking shortly with a grief specialist and to get some more insight into the grieving process for leaders and people at work. So Rob, before we bring in Kathi, why do you feel grieving is so important in a business professional setting?
Well, we take ourselves with us wherever we go. And so we can't, even as much as we try to separate, well, this is my personal life, this is my professional life. I believe the average leader and manager wants to be the best version of themselves, whether they're in the workplace, they're at home, they're in the neighborhood, etc. The workplace is where we spend 70-80% of our time. So if we want to be the best version of ourselves, we're affected by things. Let's be real.
Yeah.
And grieving a loss. It could be the loss of, a friend, a family member to death. It could be the loss of, which you and I've touched on again in prior episode, of a dream, an aspiration. It could be change, an acquisition in the workplace, and now change, and it starts to weigh on us. And there can even be loss of what we thought it should be or could be. So, Marcel, I think loss is such a huge aspect and can pay a toll on us if not grieving properly, especially in the place in which we spend 70-80% of our time in the workplace.
Yeah. Well, Rob and I are certainly not experts in this area of mental health, but our guest is. Her name is Kathi Balasek. And so let me introduce you to Kathi. She is an educator, a grief literacy communications coach, a corporate consultant, university lecturer, speaker, podcast host, and widow advocate. She teaches professionals how to improve their grief literacy communication skills to best serve bereaved clients. So we want to welcome in right now, Kathi Balasek.
Kathi, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Thank you so much, Rob and Marcel. It is an honor to be here.
Now, Kathi, this is not going to be a foreign place to enter into. In the Love in Action podcast is getting to know different guests throughout, so many months and years now. We love to get to know people and who they are and their life story and their life journey. Yours has been one without trial and tribulation. And so take us into that a little bit of your journey to have us get a better sense of who you are and as a grief specialist, why it matters so much.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just a small town kid from Montana, and I, fell in love, had kids, all those things. We had it all. I met my husband. I moved to California because that's where he was. And he was an airline pilot. I'm a teacher by trade, and we have five kids. And one day he came home, wasn't feeling good, and he had a brain tumor. And we were in our 30s, and I went from soccer mom to caregiver to widow before I was 40, and faced with all of the decisions moving forward for myself and my kids. And now moving forward, it has shaped who I am. I'm grateful for the people that helped me through this. I've found meaning and purpose after it. And so I'm paying it forward and helping others acknowledge people's loss and grief, because you feel less alone when that happens.
Kathi, thank you for sharing that. I know that there's a lot more to the story. I'm just wondering, I want to just get to the core of what was most challenging for you during the time where you lost your husband. Because I know that there are many people that have gone through the same thing. So I want you to be able to identify, or them identify with you when it happened. What was the most impactful, most challenging for you?
I think there's two things. Number one, the sadness just never goes away. That deep yearning, longing never goes away. And that was really hard. And to have the space to grieve during that time, because the multitude of tasks, paperwork, overwhelm, running the house, kids, dog schedules, when you are in this grief fog, not being clear, and thinking you've got to get all of this done, but then really needing the emotional side of grief and getting that space to grieve. So it's not a delicate dance. It's like the big old belly flop over and over and over. And it's debilitating. And so that's the biggest challenge of there's so much to be done, so many things to handle, so much paperwork, and yet you need to grieve. You have to grieve. But where are you going to find the time?
And Kathi, we have people listening, leaders and managers, but first and foremost, they're human beings. And there can be physical loss, which you experienced, but there could be other losses as well. And Marcel and I, oftentimes we'll talk the loss of a dream that never came to fruition, change that's happened in our life of not spending the time to grieve one season, but we move and fast forward our lives into a new season. And it can be a bit of a whirlwind that way as well. So whether it's physical loss or other loss, pertaining to the loss of your husband, there were a couple different losses in the midst of that. And I'd love for you to talk to us about that, 2 specific losses, because I can't help but think those listening, like, I've never thought that within a loss, there can be multiple losses. And so if we want to peel back the onion a little bit, this may help many people listening.
Absolutely. And you're spot on that, there's all types of loss, not just death. And so you can grieve many things. Grief is a natural response to loss at any time. And I think I lost John twice, first at cancer, then at death, because, anticipatory grief is when it's coming. Not many people walk away from a brain tumor, and so all of these things happening and they're coming. But what is different is you don't realize the secondary losses, and they're a domino. Becoming a widow or being suddenly solo. I no longer felt safe going places. I no longer felt like I could give people my address to come and fix my sink. Who am I if I wasn't John's wife? This loss of identity, loss of a partner, loss of somebody to bounce ideas with and share my day with. And so there's so many secondary losses that happen not only in a death, but you think of retirement and you think of these transitions and who am I if I'm not this? And it's extremely isolating. You feel alone. You feel like the only one. And people don't know how to act around you. I'm that awkward friend that makes people not want to go there. Because if it could happen to me, it could happen to you. And that's a place that emotionally is too much to handle.
Yeah. Wow. So I know people that are still grieving, Kathi, and their loss happened years ago, and they're still working through it. And some of them don't know how to work through it, right? So they're caught in this cycle of pain and hurt, always, whenever that date comes up every year, it's like reliving the moment again, right? So walk us through when you took power and realized the things you needed to do in order to overcome your hurt, overcome the grieving process to full recovery. Walk us through, that point where you realize this is what I need to do, right? And you saw light at the end of the tunnel. And then how did you get there?
Your question is awesome. And you're right. There's no timeline for grief. We all grieve differently. We can't really schedule it. And, that date, it was 19 years on the 3rd of this month. And I'm telling you, I could not wait till the 4th to be here because I just dread it every year. It's been that many years. And so when people say to you, well, I thought you've gone through that. I thought you'd be over this by now. It's not supportive. Grief is love. Every time I think of my husband, that's the love that we shared. So in dealing with this type of loss, I want to say it took about 2 to 3 years for me to stop pretending that he was still here, to stop avoiding the fact that, it'll all work out. Okay. I just tell myself these stories every day just to get myself out of bed. And then I remember my parents basically came down from Montana and moved in with me during his illness. And then that first year, they're just rock stars on this earth, and I remember my mom saying something when I was in a complete grief spiral. And she said, he's not coming back. And your kids lost one parent. They can't lose another. Mm. And I don't know what that's going to take, but we're here to help you. And it was like the light switched. And I started getting into grief support, grief counseling. I started getting my kids into counseling. If I had a child that didn't want to go to counseling, I went to their counselor to give me the tools to help support them. And I just decided that, you know what? I have to do this. I've been dealt these cards, and I was raised to play them well. And I have everybody on my team. I have God in the house that this is pushing me forward, no matter what. Because as hard as it was for me, I had to say goodbye to John. He had to say goodbye to everybody. Everybody. And so I owe it to myself, to his kids, to his memory, to his legacy, to the world to make this matter. And so it was about year 3 that I decided to go back to school, get another degree. I've been teaching at the university ever since. I've raised kids. They're all college graduates, and they're all friends with each other. So life is great.
Kathi, I'm listening to you too, and I've got to ask you this, that, I'll just bring this up as an illustration. So many of us have experienced, being a part of or engaged in a memorial service. And the officiant, the pastor, whoever's kind of leading the time, will oftentimes say something like this during the memorial service, towards the beginning of the service. There could be times, this is a celebration of one's life. There's going to be times of laughing and celebrating laughing, but there's also going to be times of crying and everything. It's tough for so many of us to reconcile joy in a grieving process and also feeling the frustration, the discouragement, the abandonment, all that, some could say, somewhat negative kind of feelings. I don't know if that's the accurate way, but, as well as the celebration, the joy, the honoring them through the sharing of funny stories and everything. But even if not in a memorial service, if we're just grieving in our life, what words would you share to bring encouragement to people going through something? How do you reconcile both of those things, or do you even see it that way?
I think at the depth of these emotions, you can't control them. All you can do is acknowledge them. And, I've met a lot of people who've gone through deep grief, deep loss. They're actually quite funny. If I didn't laugh, I wouldn't get out of bed every day.
Yeah.
And I laughed at things that John would think were funny too. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I think we're nervous about this. We don't have permission to laugh. We don't have permission to feel joyful, to move forward. And it keeps people stuck. And in one sentence, I can celebrate this beautiful memory, and then in the next 5 minutes, I'm in a grief spiral about it. But when we think about our life, isn't that where the magic is? If we want to stay in balance all the time and composed, we're not feeling. And not only do we want to acknowledge that in us and what we're going through, but when we look at another griever, join them in where they are. That's empathy. You don't have to know that I'm a widow and walk in a widow's shoes. How about you connect in the emotion of what I'm going through? that wild ride of emotion and meet me there. Because yes, it's heavy, but it's not as heavy when it's shared. And there is an energy in this empathy that people are too afraid to recognize. Because when connection happens, that ignited match is empathy versus sympathy, where I feel sorry for you, you poor thing. You better get back out there. Your kids are young. You'll meet somebody new. That is not supportive. And yet those are our go-tos because that's what's normal, because people emotionally don't want to go there because it's too sad.
Wow. I wanted to make the connection between your grieving and your recovery to the point where you realized, hey, this is my calling. And then connect that to the journey of you doing what you do now, because it's such a unique field of work that you're in. You're the first that I've heard of that, and I won't do any justice even trying to explain what you do. So I'm going to let you have the space to give our listeners kind of an idea of the grief counseling and the people that you work with. But at what point did you get to that stage where you realized this is now my life calling, and I need other people to understand this and to understand the importance of grieving?
Well, it's been a lot of tugging, pulling, to I got to a point in my career that it's a shove. Something is shoving me forward. And, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I train new teachers. This is what I love to do. And so I knew that I could take my experience, pull out some of my skills, and help create a grief literate world.
Oof.
Because I'm not a grief counselor. I'm very concerned with the language of empathizers, of leaders for their people, because we want to normalize these conversations and do them right. And we're just culturally conditioned to cheer people up. That you'll be okay, count your blessings, so sorry for your loss. That is such surface level, and we can do better. And so I started just diving into the research of, sort of the bedside manner of leadership, and what you say, what you don't say, how to ask questions, how to use your body language better with people. And so leaders, you didn't set out to be a grief leader, but if you're a leader of people, you're a grief leader. And to really have some systems in place, some language in place that help you support, retain, lead, empower your people, because that's what they're looking for you to be. So that's how that developed. And, I just created a curriculum around it. And I've had wonderful opportunities to speak and train. And I'm just riding this ride. It is so much freaking fun that I don't know how much longer I'll be a professor, but this is where I am today, and I will go anywhere as long as it's forward.
Marcel, I'll tell you, this has never been more needed than now. I mean, you and I and Kathi, we talk to leaders all over the world, and behind closed doors, they're sharing with us some insecurities, some different things they're going through in their grieving process, whatever the case may be. But to train them on how to engage in this space, Kathi, and for you to pioneer in the way that you are. My goodness, it is admirable. It's praiseworthy. I'm just so thankful that God continues to help you and navigate you and teach you so you can teach others. I'm amazed by it.
I'm equally amazed. And it's like the last 3 minutes of you speaking, there are about 5 rabbit holes that we can go down.
So true.
Okay. Because you're talking about the language of grieving. You're talking about the system of grieving. And these are all leadership, and you're pointing that back to leaders understanding and knowing and having the competency to do that. That is a totally new world to me. So I don't even know where to go from here, because I'm curious about the language of grieving. If you're a leader, what's a starting point?
So you can see I get really excited about this topic, which is really, people think you're nuts because you're talking about grief. How can this be an exciting topic? All we're talking about is helping people, right? And that's exciting. And some of the things where I like to help people in the initial stages when they're leaders is to really start becoming aware of their unconscious bias. And are they saying or doing anything that would disenfranchise somebody's right to grieve? Because when we avoid grief, we dismiss it, we justify it, it causes disenfranchised grief, and people don't think they're allowed to heal. People don't think this loss is important enough, And so 3 areas where I want to help people is to start acknowledging that there's no hierarchy of loss. Okay. The age of somebody dying is irrelevant to the person who lost that human. And often we say things that disenfranchise somebody's grief. We say, well, at least they lived a long life. At least, your kids didn't get to see them sick. These whole at least statements, they're not connectors. So age is one. Okay. A loss is a loss, a death is a death. It doesn't matter what you think. And so to start becoming aware of that bias. Another thing is the type of death. I will have people say to me in conferences, I'm like people's truth serum. When I say this is what I do, they just automatically tell me. It's given them permission. Wouldn't that be great to have any leader like that?
Oh, yeah.
Let's open this up. They'll say, my daughter died by suicide. What do you say from that? And so I teach people what to say in those instances that acknowledge that type of death. And again, there's no hierarchy. Is somebody who died by suicide and somebody died in their sleep or cancer, 40 years old with 5 kids? You might be thinking that, but we've got to check that this is about the person in front of us. Okay. And it's such a depth of emotions. It's really hard to keep coming back there. So there's age, there's type of death. And then somehow we think about the relationship. Well, yeah, but this was your aunt, and your aunt died, or your pet died, or your mother, or your child, or it was infertility. It doesn't matter to you. It matters to the person in front of you. And you can only show up with them if you're going to acknowledge that we all have unconscious bias, right? We all do. But to serve and see and support this person in front of you, we have to start using some scripted phrases that acknowledge them, acknowledge their loss and pain, say their person's name, and normalize this conversation and create a safe space for this person.
This is so good, Marcel. I'm telling you, this is so good for me personally, because I'm learning so much in such a short period of time. Like I recently was talking to someone, they said, I'm going to be meeting with someone who just had a loss in their life. And I said, don't worry as much about what to say or how you're going to say it. Just it's your mere presence in their life that ultimately may matter most. So don't get caught up. But what I'm hearing from you is, yeah, presence certainly does matter. But learning what to say or what not to say certainly will help. And it'll help tremendously as well. So I need to grow in that area of how I can improve, how I can grow. Because presence, although it's really important, I don't know if there's anything you would say to that. Like obviously being there and giving, someone going through a loss, just to hug them without saying anything, to let them understand that you're with them, you're for them, you're here for them. It's the power of nonverbal, certainly, but the verbal aspects are really important because so much comes out of our mouth. And we may with nerves and anxiety and knowing. So someone like you comes along to help us in that process so we can even be proactive and walk and enter into this space with greater confidence in a sense too. So I don't know. Am I just not doing enough saying presence? Just your presence is being there. Is that, obviously it's not enough, but is that a good starting point for people?
Absolutely. This is not a one and done. This is multifaceted, and showing up and being present, eye contact, body language, unplugging everything to show up for this person and meeting this human, it cannot be overlooked.
Yeah.
And, grief literacy is a life skill. It just is. It's for everybody. And it not only improves your people's life, it improves your life. You show up better for the people in your orbit. And we want to think about when you're present, we want to keep in touch with that person, keep reaching out. How do you write a condolence card? Okay. That's something I teach. There's certain things we say, certain things we do. Social media etiquette when there's a death. Okay. There's some important things that we want to start acknowledging people's loss. So when I teach this to people, it's in steps. Okay. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just adding another skill set that is going to improve your life, the people around you, everybody you serve, and it just makes you a better human.
Kathi, let's pull back to more of a macro level because we talk a lot about culture here on the show. And Rob, I can tell you that we've never registered on the radar the grief process or considering the trait of grieving as a cultural value or is a way to, build culture. I mean, we can talk about how to build a high performing culture until we're blue in the face, but this is new stuff. And so Kathi, bring us to that conversation that we must have with, say, a CEO or the C-suite who has the power to champion a culture where this is acceptable and it becomes the norm, right? So what would you tell a CEO to include as one of their cultural artifacts, cultural traits, cultural values, the value of grieving?
Number one, I think leaders need to brand compassion. This needs to be a part of their business because grief is in the house every day in some form. And what type of leader do you want to be? And do you want to have resources for your employees, for your team? Do you want to have opportunities to grow, opportunities to connect at a deeper level? Do you want to have a system in place that has a point person when somebody is grieving and they need to take some bereavement leave? What is your bereavement leave? Okay, is it 2 weeks as it should be? There's a handful of states only that are doing 2 weeks. Basically, it's 3 days if it's a spouse, 5 days if it's a child. Wow. So that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
We can do better. So do you want to be a leader in empathy, compassion, and grief? People don't like to say the word grief leader. Okay. This is a universal experience. Let's make it a universal language. Meet people where they are, because you will attract a team and employees, clients with your company, but you'll keep them when you can relate to them on an emotional level in their deepest, darkest times. This needs to be a piece of what you do and how you support people. Period. And when you're ready, the opportunity for you to grow as a leader and as a company, it's outer limits.
Marcel, you and I talked about the bereavement policies, I think on one of the other episodes where we did touch on grief. And we didn't have a lot of those stats, but Kathy's really starting to enter into that space. And for leaders, really taking a look at the policy that you currently have in place and getting together with your team, HR leaders, director, managers, and saying, what should this be? How can we reevaluate things and integrate this in, as opposed to something that we do? This is who we are. And if this is who we are, what changes actually need to take place? So thank you so much for highlighting that, Kathi. Marcel, I've got to ask this one other thing. We know as leaders, we can only give what we got. And so many of us as leaders, we're struggling through a loss right now, listening to this. Kathi, I know that, everyone grieves differently. There's no doubt about that. You alluded to that earlier. But what are some common healthy ways that you look across the board through your experience, through your research and data, of some things that leaders should consider to do intentionally, proactively, perhaps consistently as well, to make sure that they're grieving in a healthy way? Anything come to mind?
Yes. I think number one is permission to take the time to grieve. Because leaders, we've got to be there for other people. Well, you can't give from an empty cup. You and I both know that. And find the best community of support out there, whether it's a psychologist, pastors, any type of support, grief support, and get the skills. There are wonderful professionals that I can't imagine where I'd be today if I didn't have their services and they helped me put some tools in action. I can't stress enough the importance of taking care of your physical health. When you are grieving, you are stripped of everything. And so hydration, food, fresh air, exercise, we can all agree that wouldn't hurt. So those are my two big things to really make sure that leaders give themselves permission that they have to deal with that person in the mirror. Pay me now or pay me later. But pay me later, you're going to pay a long, long time. And grief never goes away. We learn to wear it differently. We learn to walk alongside it. But when we have support and community, people around us support us in good times and bad.
Kathi, it's been such a rich conversation. Wow. As we wind down here, what's your ultimate hope for leaders just beginning their journey to understand this process?
My hope is that they'll be open. Okay. Life is so much about readiness and open. And as a daughter of a basketball player, you can't have the ball if you don't get open for it. And this is a difficult subject because it isn't normalized. And yet, if you're in a leadership position, what are you waiting for? There's some skills that you can learn. It'll help somebody. It'll help you. Start with let's getting grief literate. That's my hope, is that every human on this earth learns to normalize the conversations and their responses to somebody so that grievers feel seen, heard, and respected.
Kathi, we bring it home as we do with every guest with 2 questions. And here they are. First, what's really tugging at your heart right now that you'd like us to know?
Well, since we're on this loss, and what's been really tugging at my heart is I have a daughter who's moving out of where I live, and she's moving 2 states away and taking my 2 grandchildren with her. That's loss. That's grief. And it's really tugging at me of how do I show up for her and for their family, and knowing that this is a decision that I know is good for them, but my bias, my pain, I'm bringing it into the story. And so am I practicing what I'm preaching right now? And to really release this up to God and to say, you know, at least it's not Florida, it's just Arizona, it's 2 states away. I can be there, and recognizing that this is a loss and giving myself permission to hurt and miss, but also putting me on the platform of an opportunity to grow and be there more for them.
Finally, you bring us home, as all guests do, with that one thing that we can take away from this conversation to keep us inspired and moving forward.
The word grief, start saying it in sentences. Let's normalize this word called grief. Okay, we're all experiencing it. We're all feeling it. Stop cheering it out. Start acknowledging somebody's pain. Because that's where the connection is. That's where the beauty is. That's why we're here. We're here to see and support one another along this journey.
Rob, I don't know about you, but some of the stuff I heard today has blown me away.
Oh my goodness. I'm like, as I'm listening to you, Kathi, share about your daughter moving out, I'm actually holding back of what I would say to bring encouragement to you. Like already I'm suspending some things to actually let it soak in, to further connect with you. Like that's my takeaway. Sometimes I'm too quick to speak in the name of encouragement when I just need to let it soak in and be present and connect with them in that hurt, that pain. And I did that with you today silently, but I really did that. So I just thank you so much for the gift that you are and everything that you shared today.
Thank you so much. This has been such a privilege.
Kathi, let's give a shout out to your work, your business. How can people get a hold of you? And maybe you can share what some of the things that you can do for your client.
Excellent. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Kathi Balasek. I train teams, I train CEOs, I speak at conferences. I challenge people to rise in this area and yet empower them to want to. Because I don't want to rally for you. I want to rally with you. And you can do this. And I don't know what you're waiting for, because we all know how this movie ends. You know, we all are going to die. We all are going to lose. And so let's start seeing each other. So I would love to help anyone out there who wants to move forward and grow their people.
Thank you again, Kathi. It's been amazing discussion. I am honored to have heard and privileged to have heard your journey, your story, And I feel empowered by some of these tools that we need to learn. And you've raised my awareness of grieving more than ever. So I want to thank you for your wisdom today. We're all better for it.
Marcel, Rob, this has just been a joy. It's the highlight to my kickoff to summer. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's all we got for you today. I'm Marcel Schwantes on behalf of Rob Holman, Kathi Balasek. Please join us next time. And if you want to find out more about this episode, you can do so on my website, marcelschwantes.com. And there you will find all of the resources and the show notes and a link to the YouTube so you can watch the episode as well. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.